I don't remember where I put it. Not it in the physical sense, but it, the real me. My life was defined by predictability. I'm a librarian, specifically an archivist, dealing with historical records that are, by nature, static and immutable. My apartment is quiet, overlooking a small, unremarkable city park. I have a cat named Libris who judges me from atop a bookshelf, and a boyfriend, Mark, who leaves cryptic little notes on the fridge. It was a comfortable, structured life, the kind where your biggest decision of the day is choosing a brand of tea. I trusted the timeline, the documented truth of my existence, much like I trusted the dates stamped on the books I catalogued every day. Everything was filed, dated, and true. The initial cracks appeared as minor chronological errors. I'd be certain I'd filed a collection of letters last Tuesday, only to find the slip dated 2 weeks prior, my handwriting confirming it. Then came the tangible discrepancies. I own a specific ceramic mug, dark blue, chipped handle. I've owned it for 5 years, but I started finding a second mug identical in every way, except this one had no chip. It would appear on my drying rack, and the chipped one would be nowhere to be found. A few hours later, the chipped one would return, and the perfect one would vanish. It wasn't just physical objects. Mark, my boyfriend, would sometimes talk about things I had absolutely no memory of. A trip to the coast last summer, a heated argument about money. And he'd look at me with genuine confusion when I denied them. The panic wasn't about the events themselves, but the terrifying realization that my memory had gaps that someone else's reality had filled. The dualities became aggressive. I started seeing things in my own home that didn't belong, things that were too specific to be coincidence. A small framed photo on my bedside table of me, but standing next to a different woman, someone I'd never met, who wore Mark's college sweatshirt. I'd rushed to my archives at the library, frantically checking my personal file, my birth certificate, my college transcripts. They were always perfect, always consistent with the life I knew. But when I got home, the photos, the ones with the other woman, the ones showing different furniture in my living room, the ones that showed me with a completely different haircut, would sometimes be back. They were like ghost files in the archives of my life. My paranoia fixated on Mark. He seemed too calm, too grounded. When he talked, I started watching his eyes, looking for a stutter, a hesitation, a sign that he was reading from a script. The notes he left on the fridge became more unsettling. One morning it simply read, "She knows. I was home alone." Libris was on the windowsill. I looked at the chipped blue mug on the counter, then turned to the sink to wash a plate. The shift was instantaneous. When I turned back, the mug was gone. In its place was the perfect, unchipped mug. And Libris, the cat, was gone from the sill. But something was on the floor near the bookshelf, a small pile of grey fur and bone fragments. I didn't scream. I froze. The air felt thick, viscous. And then I noticed the sound. A faint, repetitive clack, clack, clack coming from inside the walls. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and plunged it into the drywall. I ripped away the plaster. There was no wiring, no pipes, no structural wood, just a solid metallic surface. And embedded in it, like a fused fossil, was the chipped blue ceramic mug. It wasn't inside the wall. It was the wall, solidified, half-formed. As I stared at it, the metallic surface rippled, and the faint, repetitive sound changed. It sounded exactly like a keyboard typing. Fast. Constant. I left the knife and the gaping hole in the wall. I ran out. I never told Mark. I didn't call the police. I just drove. I'm writing this from a motel 500 miles away. I'm starting to realize that the two realities aren't swapping. They're merging. The memory gaps aren't mine. They were the other me's memories forcing their way into this version of the timeline. The chipped mug, the unchipped mug, my cat Libris, the bones. They are two versions of the same file struggling for dominance. I went to a local library here to look up my own name in the digital news archives. I found two results. One is the librarian you know. The other is a woman with a different job, living in a different state, married to a man whose name is not Mark, who was reported missing 6 months ago. And I know, deep in the cold, humming terror of my mind, that I didn't move 500 miles. I was reloaded 500 miles away. I am the missing woman, and the librarian whose life I'm currently wearing, the life with Mark, the life with the nice apartment, is going to come back for her file. And when she does, there won't be two of me. There will just be it, and I won't remember I was ever here. I'm afraid to fall asleep because the other me is waiting to wake up. My biggest fear used to be dying alone. Now it's realizing I already did, and this is the memory. I needed a break. The city had hollowed me out, so I rented a remote cabin upstate for a week. It was perfect. Rough-hewn logs, a stone fireplace, and a deep silence broken only by the wind in the pines. My only company was my old dog Barnaby. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, which was the point. I brought books, comfortable clothes, and a few bottles of wine. For the first 2 days, I settled into a rhythm of reading by the fire and long walks in the woods. I felt the familiar knots in my shoulders unraveling. It was a simple, real, and restorative escape. The very first thing was the notebook. I found a small leather-bound journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard near the bed. It was filled with beautiful, intricate sketches of the surrounding forest, but the handwriting was mine. I knew it was mine. The distinct slope of the T's, the little curl on the G's. But I had never seen the notebook before. The journal entries detailed a stay at the cabin exactly 1 month ago. It talked about the same books I'd brought, the same routes I'd walked, and mentioned a dog named Barkley, who looked exactly like Barnaby. The date on the last entry was October 1st. Today was October 4th. I started questioning my memory, but the certainty that I had only just arrived was absolute. I called the rental agency. They confirmed my reservation started yesterday. I put the notebook away, blaming a previous renter who was perhaps strangely obsessed with my life. But the smell of pine sap and stale smoke started to feel less comforting and more like a permanent stain on the air, an indicator of something old and cyclical. The repetitions became terrifyingly precise. I ran out of milk and decided to hike to the nearest general store. When I got there, the cashier, a stout woman with a floral apron, looked at me with tired recognition and said, "Back for more milk, dear? Didn't take you long this time." I hadn't been there before. When I got back to the cabin, the mail slot held a postcard addressed to me, but the postmark was September 25th. The message, written by someone I didn't recognize, read, "Hope the third time is the charm, don't forget the milk." The cabin itself started to defy logic. I would meticulously stack the logs by the fireplace, But when I returned from a walk, they would be restacked in a slightly different configuration, one I recognized from a drawing in the strange notebook. I realized I was not just repeating actions, I was living inside a loop of someone else's, or another version of my own, immediate past. I looked at Barnaby, and his eyes, usually full of gentle warmth, seemed to hold a fleeting, profound sadness. He wasn't my dog. He was Barkley. And he'd been through this before. I tried to break the cycle. I packed my bags, determined to leave immediately before the loop could tighten again. I strapped Barnaby into the passenger seat and started the engine. I drove 10 minutes down the winding dirt road toward the highway. That's when I saw the familiar, splintered sign for the cabin, the one I had passed on my way in, now facing me. I pulled over, heart hammering. The odometer confirmed I had driven 10 miles away from the cabin. I turned the car around and drove back. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. There were 2 rental cars parked side by side, mine and an identical, slightly dirtier model. Both had my license plate number. The front door of the cabin was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The cabin was identical to mine, but everything was double. 2 versions of my suitcase were on the bed. 2 identical, half-empty wine glasses sat on the table, and by the fireplace, one man, wearing my clothes with my face, was kneeling, carefully restacking the logs. He looked up at me with a look of overwhelming, exhausted terror. He wasn't hostile. He was desperate, and he whispered one word. "Again?" I stared at him, my double, the man who was perhaps the real me. Before I could process the terror, the air thickened, the faint smell of pine sap and stale smoke turning overpowering. The man by the fireplace suddenly jerked, his eyes going wide and blank. The terror in his face was instantly replaced by a calm, blank familiarity. He smiled the same comforting, ordinary smile I use in front of the mirror and picked up a log. "Oh, hello," my double said, his voice, my voice, perfectly normal. "Just arrived? Welcome, the city can really hollow you out, right? I'm Ethan, I've been here a week now. The rent was cheap and the quiet is perfect. You must be tired." He didn't remember the notebook, the dual cars, or the terror we had just shared. I looked down at my hands. I was holding an identical leather-bound notebook. I didn't remember picking it up. My double was now me. And I was the confused newcomer, but the deepest terror wasn't the swap. It was the realization that I don't remember leaving the city. I don't remember the drive up. My life didn't loop. It was overwritten. And I know with chilling certainty that in exactly 1 month, a 3rd car will pull up, and I will be the calm, empty one, waiting by the fireplace to greet the next exhausted version of me and whisper the lines of the script I'm now forced to live. The man who just arrived is me, and the man waiting for him is also me, and I am simply the memory being lived for the final time. I'm terrified of waking up tomorrow because I don't know which one of us will remember this day.